The sprint planning, the first of 4 required ceremonies in Scrum. It's 9 a.m. Has anyone seen Jay? It looks like he's late for the sprint planning again.
I think he had a late night last night, if you know what I mean.
Okay, then let's get started. I worked with David to ensure that we have groomed stories for the next 2 sprints or so. And with that said, as you guys know, we have some stories for the last sprint that did not get accepted. So they are back in the product backlog and reprioritized accordingly. I also did the velocity planning based on the team's average velocity for the last 4 sprints and people's time off from the team for this sprint. Thank you for joining us, Jay. The average velocity for the last 4 sprints is 40 points. However, since everyone is in a training on Thursday, and that is the only time off people have on their calendars, I subtracted 10% from the velocity. 10% is because our sprints are typically 10 days. Planned velocity for sprint 5 is 36 points. I'll turn it over to our product owner to explain the sprint goal and to go through the high-value stories for this sprint.
Thanks for the intro. Can you please go back to the product backlog screen? As I mentioned before, business would like to see some of the reporting and transaction features. So the goal for this sprint is reporting and transaction features. With that said, we didn't get to 2 stories from the last sprint. Both of those stories are aligned with the goal and are very much high priority. So I would like to bring those 2 stories back into this sprint. They're each 8 points. Can we please bring up the next story from the backlog? This next story, Social Media Integration Architecture, we covered in our backlog grooming session. This is a technical story, as you recall, and it has the full technical description, acceptance criteria, estimate, and task breakdown. Let me know if you have any further questions. Okay, we're up to 24 points initially committed. We have capacity for another 12 points worth of stories. Let's take a look at the next story, which is also 8 points. This next story, social media integration with Twitter and Facebook, we covered in our backlog grooming session. So this has the full narrative, description, acceptance criteria, estimate, and task breakdown. Let me know if you have any further questions. However, remember, this is dependent on the last story we pulled in because the architecture needs to be implemented before we code the functionality.
Do you guys have any questions or concerns given that this story is dependent on another 8-point story?
Shouldn't be an issue if we swarm around the stories and do it as a team. We should have enough time in our sprint to do both stories.
Great. Then let's look at the next work item in the backlog.
I can explain this one since it's a spike that I created. Before we build out our automated regression library, we need to research and do a POC on how and what we want to automate. For example, automated unit tests versus automated functional tests, smoke tests. The spike describes in detail, as I discussed with you guys offline, different options. So, if we can do a POC for each option and evaluate, that would be great.
I'm glad we're taking our time to evaluate, because if we pick the right strategy, it will save us a lot of time in regards to testing and ensure higher quality. Agile is all about being efficient and effective.
Okay, if there are no objections then, I'll pull this spike into the sprint backlog. Since this spike is 5 points from what you estimated before, we're pretty much at capacity for this sprint. Are you good with that sprint commitment?
Yep.
Okay, guys, let's do the confidence voting based on the fist of 5. Ready? 1, 2, 3. That's a wrap.